All right. Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the first Network Stewards call of the year. I thank you all for spending your afternoon with us today. We have a great conversation ahead of us today. So just again, like really happy that you all can be here. I just want to remind you all of myself. My name is Melanie Edwards. I have been with the Wallace Center now for 2 years as a program associate, and I'm based in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula on Coast Salish lands. And so we have our community agreements up here. Just want to remind you all of how we share this space together. This space, our community agreements are to honor and celebrate our collective wisdom, to be mindful of our power, privilege, and how much space that we're taking up. We take responsibility for impact regardless of intent. We give grace to one another and approach conflict with curiosity. We challenge assumptions, respect our differences, and speak from our own experiences, and honor confidentiality. Lessons leave, stories stay. And then also just a reminder to take care of your own physical and mental needs and emotional needs, and meet each other where we are. And showing up in this space is enough. So again, just really happy that you're all here with us today. With that, I want to introduce you all to our guest speaker today. We have with us Dr. Marcus Coleman, who serves as a professor of practice in the School of Liberal Arts at Tulane University, and he has a joint appointment in the Department of Economics and Strategy Leadership with analytics minor. And through his current work, Dr. Coleman seeks to foster equitable and sustainable food systems via leadership development and community engagement that are inclusivity beneficial to all economically, socially, environmentally, and politically. So Marcus has been an active member of the Food Systems Leadership Network, and we're really grateful and he's gone through many different programming through our work, including our mentorship program. So we're really grateful to have him here with us today to share the report that he released, which I'm going to put in the chat. If you didn't have a chance to read it, you could read the full report later, which we encourage you to do. But I'll pause there, and without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Marcus.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to be here today and to talk about this report. So just a little background before I get started. I co-authored this report for the Aspen Institute with Rich Pirog. Rich and I actually met through the Wallace Center and the Food System Leadership Network. He was my mentor as a part of the mentorship program. And so just sort of one of those outcomes that we had in participating in sort of the great programming that's available through the Wallace Center. And so that I'm very excited to talk about some of what we discussed in the article and provide some background and grounding to that, just really based upon my thoughts about how I view the food system in some ways that I think that, we're working to tackle some of the issues in the food system, but also just to sort of give us some prompts here for reflection as we continue to do the variety of food systems-based work that we are all very much so engaged in. Just a little background about myself. I'm a native of rural Louisiana, born and raised in the northeast corner of Louisiana, Tensas Parish. Agricultural community, primarily cotton, corn, and soybeans is what we grew or still grow in that area of the state. But right now, I kind of hang out at Tulane University in our School of Liberal Arts. I have a joint appointment in our Department of Economics and our Strategy, Leadership, and Analytics minor. My primary focus is food systems and food systems development, but also leadership development as a part of that. My interest in leadership development, I spent 5 years as a student affairs administrator, and so had some great work dealing with community engagement and leadership development, not only from a student perspective, but in working in a variety of different communities. Also, I serve on our faculty advisory committee for our environmental studies program, and I also help out as an adjunct professor at North Carolina A&T State University in their agribusiness program there. Just some other things that I have going on. I'm a member of the Racial Equity in the Food System Work Group that's spearheaded out of the Center for Regional Food Systems at Michigan State University. I'm also on the advisory committee for Next California Project, a meeting that I just literally got out of right before we started here. With Next California, we're essentially looking at what does it look like to take some of the food production that's happening in the Central Valley of California, and what does that process look like to begin to shift some of that production to the Mid-Delta region, closer to the Mississippi River, where there's a few more water resources and other resources there to support agricultural production. And I'm also a board member for a few organizations, the Groundswell Center up in Ithaca, Ag Launch, Ag Innovation Organization based in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm also a board member for our local Economic Development Alliance here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They also is an organization that's responsible for our local farmers markets here in the Baton Rouge region, just to give you a little bit of some of the things that I do, what takes up my time, and the things that I'm really excited about. As we begin to sort of shift into sort of the conversation today, though, I just want centering exercises how I look at food systems in the process of a food system, looking at the food system as being a variety of steps and processes that are involved in the growing, transforming, transporting, selling, and exchange of food, and sort of the outcomes of those processes or the interaction of those processes impacts a very diverse base of individuals, businesses, and communities. Now, within the sort of the report that Rich and I did, we use sort of a different definition of food systems there in looking at the players and interactions along the food supply chain, from input supply to the production of food, to how once those products leave the farm gate, to how those things ultimately, go into transportation, processing, retailing, wholesaling, which the preparation of foods to consumption and eventual disposal and recycling. So sort of the stage of sort of the evolution of this, or why we have the problem, or what sort of led us to writing the report, was given, how we look at the food system and how we've defined the food system. We look at the interactions between both urban citizens and rural citizens, and understanding that low-income families in both urban and rural communities have been significantly impacted by the loss of smaller farms or those smaller food and agribusinesses, and overall the consolidation of the retail food industry, and how those sort of changes and shifts have impacted diverse communities and diverse citizens. A part of that is looking at sort of supermarket migration from rural communities or urban centers, where supermarkets, from a business perspective, those supermarkets may have been seen as being less profitable, or looking at both their balance sheets and their income statements, lower profitability. And when those business entities shifted out of the communities, they created, what was at one point, widely known as food deserts. But what we're talking about here is essentially situations where residents can't easily access fresh, healthy, or affordable foods, and looking at sort of the linkage and the association between lack of access to those healthy and affordable foods, and how those things are directly correlated with poor health conditions in folks experiencing chronic diseases. And so sort of another centering exercise that is looking at how I look at the notion of food access. And from my perspective, I look at food access in primarily is being an outcome of how well the agri-food system meets the needs of consumers. And that has traditionally been done in four areas: growing food, transforming food, transporting food, and selling food. And from a diagrammatic perspective, and just general how we have historically looked at this thing in the field of agricultural economics, looking at it, supply and demand flows of how, consumers, people, diverse consumers that want to buy, sell, or exchange food, and how sort of consumer demand works in sort of market iterations with food supply flows in sort of the processes of that. What sort of over the last 5 years is what I've come to have a more of an appreciation from, as opposed to the initial sort of pieces of my career, is understanding the very wide range of dynamic roles and situations and occurrences in sort of constructs that take place within the food system. There are biological systems. There are sort of, what we would look at the traditional sort of supply piece of the food system and looking at agricultural production, availability of land and good clean water. There's economic systems involved in this. There's health systems involved in this. There are political systems that are involved in this. And then there's, of course, the demand system, which revolves around a social system of things like social networking and food access and education and food culture. And in sort of in true form, a food system really looks at how all of these wide-ranging sort of aspects, these different constructs, how their interactions form to develop a holistic, more inclusive, a more diverse food system. And so if we're looking at food access, and we can take all of those sort of sort of constructs within that broader sort of description of a food system, we can, initially, we narrow the notion of food access down as been what most people look at this as sort of being the notion of affordability, as being the centering piece related to food access. There's also a notion of accessibility and availability, acceptability and accommodation. And I've recently sort of began to look at notions of adequacy and agency with that. And so, and I won't spend a lot of time going through this. We'll hopefully we can make these sort of slides available a little bit late after today's presentation, where we define some of these things, but particularly looking at affordability, looking at sort of a combination of things related to food prices, but also budgetary considerations for consumers, accessibility being sort of the ease at which people can get to a location where food is available, availability, the sufficiency of the amount of food supplied at locations where people acquire food, accommodation, how well food sources adapt and adopt to people, accept and adapt to people's needs. Acceptability relates directly to things like people's attitude regarding the attributes that their local food environment provides to them. The other side of that is looking at this notion of adequacy, food that is nutrition is safe and needed to maintain healthy lifestyles, and the availability of those adequate foods, and agency from the perspective of whether or not people are empowered in defining and securing their rights with respect to sort of their own food security. And so this is sort of a variety of things of how we define the food system, or how we look at food access, whether we're talking about food access in urban communities or rural communities. These are all sort of things that we work, within food systems, whether we localize food systems more broadly, we're all working to address some form of issue. And sort of the takeaway from the report that we did was, in much of the work where we're working to address a variety of different issues, we deal with that from the perspective of networks, and how we form networks, and how networks come together to address a variety of different issues. And we look at it from the perspective of a variety of different high-performing networks, and how within the context and the scope of this work, high-performing networks are critical to the success of much of the work that we not only do in food systems, but in solving a variety of issues in other arenas as well. And so Rich, he's been doing this work much longer than I have, and so he's been very keen on how we describe the type of networks, or how we build networks, or how we build coalitions. And so we described high functioning networks in our article in 3 ways. Whether that was a cooperating network, in which most of us, and we'll chat about this on the back end, is how, in defining these 3 types of networks, based upon the work that we're doing, based upon how we interact with colleagues or other folks in sort of achieving, common goal, or some mutual purpose that we share in getting work done, what type of network, are we involved in, or what types of networks are we involved in? The first of these, which is being a cooperating network, sort of a model, or how we being able to explain best practices. Are we bringing folks together to have problem solving sessions, or being able to update each other on new projects? The other piece of this is a coordinating network, and these sort of networks of individuals really work together to push organizational boundaries and in being able to engage more in interdependent work and activities amongst people or amongst groups within these networks. But doing so requires some sense of mutual alliance. And then sort of the third network that we talked about within this was more of a collaborating network, as being able to pursue fundamental long-term system creation or systemic change. And so sort of looking at cooperating networks, coordinating networks, or collaborating networks, and looking at them from top to bottom, the cooperating network being much more low risk type of network or type of engagement that typically brings about little to no change, all the way up to collaborating networks, which involve high trust amongst people within the network. There's typically a high level of risk involved in doing that work or collaborating at that level, but doing work within the context of sort of collaborating networks brings about the greatest sort of opportunity to bring about systems change. Sort of the glue to looking at networks and how well we operate within the context of networks, and how well we foster change within networks, as sort of Rich's baby within this was this notion of complex reciprocity. And in order for networks to achieve more and to be able to reach goals and achieve sort of common goals and mutual interests and influence systems change, we really need to sort of foster a culture of values that center around this notion of complex reciprocity. And so within this is how well are we able to share information and resources, and assist other folks without expecting something to receive something as a part of that. And so sort of the centering piece of this is a piece where helping others becomes the norm. And so within this context, building and maintaining and enhancing a strong collaboration infrastructure that values complex reciprocity has been essential to sort of building food system networks and strategies. What we all know with this is, just depending on the type of organization that we're working with, or how we approach addressing a variety of different food system issues, determines, one, the type of network that we're able to form, or the type of networks that we're able to participate in. And based upon the type of networks that we're able to participate in, how much so is the work that we're doing, or sort of the values that we place on the work, sort of our will to get the work done, which to what extent does this notion, or to what extent are we able to bring in this notion of complex reciprocity? And so looking at this between the differences of how the variety of different community-based and people-led organizations that are on the ground doing work to foster food systems change, how do we best prop them up? But also, how are we able to work collaboratively with long-standing systems such as the Cooperative Extension Service, and the role that the Cooperative Extension Service plays in facilitating change within the food system, or looking at it at a variety of different entities such as the Cooperative Extension Service and the work that's happening on the ground in many communities, and how do we get collaboration, real collaboration, true collaboration that's based upon complex reciprocity. Whereas if the land grant institution is applying for a grant, and the grant requirements state that the institution has to partner with a community-based organization, how can we ensure that partnership that's required as a part of the grant with the community-based organization is true, and that there's some mutual benefit that's being achieved from that, and that there's a real relationship that's developed between the entities that are involved, that are creating real and sustainable change within communities, that's based upon the notion of complex reciprocity. Sort of on the backside of this, we made a few recommendations just based upon our experiences with a variety of different networks. And we shared within the report, we shared 6 different networks or types of networks that each of us had. Rich shared 3 and I shared 3 that we had been involved in. And based upon sort of our experience in working with a variety of different types of networks, what are some of those things that were needed to foster sustainability among those networks? And it's important to note that within the context of the report that we did, um, we talked about this from the perspective of fostering racial equity in rural communities related to the food system. But many of these sort of outcomes that we pointed out from the perspective of the report were very similar. One, adequate financial support that fosters strong collaboration infrastructure. And so we can come together to do work, to solve some problem, to address some issue in the community. But there has to be an emphasis on putting together a strong infrastructure that facilitates the collaboration, whether that's from the perspective of we're applying for funding, and if we're applying for funding, making sure that the funder, or it's highlighted in our grant proposals, that time is needed within the context of pulling together this project to build sort of this strong foundation related to collaboration infrastructure. And it takes finances to do that effectively. The other part of this is looking at the role of minority serving institutions, particularly the 1890 and the 1994 land grant institutions. The 1890 land grant institutions being your historically Black colleges and university, in your 1994 land grants being the tribal colleges, of understanding the role that they play in meeting the needs and working with and supporting both socially disadvantaged and marginalized communities, and providing equitable and sustainable funding to them to work directly with communities and providing support to communities, but providing them equitable support in a way where the folks on the ground at these institutions are empowered to do their own work and not always having to lean on larger institutions such as the 1862 land grants in order to go into communities and do this work. Being able to create a shared space for leadership and power across all participants. And so if we have collaborative work, if we're creating collaborative, true collaborative, collaborating networks, making sure that, no matter the size of the organization, whether it's a small organization to a large organization that's involved within the context of the network, that power and leadership is shared equally across all participants that are participating in that work. And of course, coming back to this piece about complex reciprocity, being able to foster a culture where complex reciprocity is the norm for members to learn from and help one another achieve mutual goals, or a mutual purpose, a common interest, or whatever the problem is that we're seeking to solve there. And sort of the last 3 pieces that I'll point out, and before we can open up to some discussion or questions, is being able to build co-learning and accountability within a network, within your network or your project team. Being able to facilitate spaces where diverse leaders can share and address mutual challenges. And so it's always important to point out that we all facilitate spaces in our work, and based upon whatever our perspective or our definition of diversity is, that's who we invite to those tables. And when we get into true sort of inclusive environments, we want to make sure that those environments are very safe and very or power sharing environments where the individuals involved or the leaders involved within that process and can discover and also appreciate the mutual goals and sort of the purpose for everyone being at the table, and how best everyone at the table can sort of work together to achieve sort of the common goal, in particular within the context of food systems and food systems development, and whether it's racial equity in the food system, whether that's local food systems development, whether that's context of looking at fostering the success of urban agriculture across a variety of urban centers, making sure that everyone at the table is able to sort of have a role in being able to sort of the role and the purpose of everyone at that table. And the last piece here, and I think that, and this is an important piece here, that I've found particularly within some of these larger network settings, if you will, that I participate in, is being able to create or designate a stable organization to serve as the foundation that regularly convenes all the stakeholders that are involved in the process. One of the reasons why groups like the Food Systems Leadership Network is sustainable is one, yes, there's a strong group of individuals, diverse individuals from across the country that come together to provide sort of the meat and the bones of the Food System Leadership Network. But sort of the foundation of that is because support is provided from the Wallace Center to help facilitate a lot of things behind the scene that push this network forward. Another organization that I was a part of, our Sarah 47, I was the chair for this organization 2 years ago, which is a group of when I was in the land grant world, it's a group of land grant institutions that come together for both local and regional food system success. One of the reasons why we were able to, when that group was successful at facilitating individuals, is that we had the Southern Rural Development Center at Mississippi State was sort of that stable organization that served as a foundation and sort of a clearinghouse for that organization. One of the greatest things that we can point to when sort of networks or collaboratives fail is that there is no solid foundation. When we go into these agreements or these networks or these collaborative environments as a group of 10 different organizations, just as an example, we all approach that room with sort of the work that our organization is doing. But who within the room is able to take sort of a step back and being that centering, non-biased piece or non-biased foundation to really help facilitate people and the individuals that are involved in that network and really and truly bring people together to achieve common goals and sort of mutual purpose. And so I think that, and I'll wrap with this piece and we can open up for questions. The centering piece of why we really wrote this article was sort of to give folks who are interested in doing more and in building networks something that they can take a step back and reflect on and really ask themselves the question, what type of network am I involved in, and how effective or impactful is this network at actually achieving sort of the common goal or mutual purpose that it states that it's trying to achieve. And so in putting this together, we really wanted, from the perspective of defining sort of those three types of high functioning networks, and then looking at this notion of complex reciprocity as sort of a way for folks to take a step back and take a 30,000-foot level view of the meaning of the work and how impactful and effective are we at actually achieving this work. And so with that, I'll open it up for questions, or we can. What I'm really interested in is understanding for folks to look at this and just look at the organizations that you work for or networks that you're involved in, and really think through how impactful is the work that we're doing, or what's needed in order to sort of achieve a greater level of impact. We'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I already see a hand up. Andrew.
Hey, Marcus, thank you for sharing this and coming to the Network Stewards call today. It's so great to learn about your research. And I love how you described complex reciprocity. And that's a new term to me. I was thinking, I didn't know how that was different from reciprocity, where you're exchanging, compared to that versus like generosity, just giving something. So I'm curious to hear more about that term, how it's defined, and ways to foster that within a network.
So depending on the type of, let's use the example of the type of organization that we approach sort of a network with. For us as individuals, reciprocity, our will to, sort of, help people within the context of not wanting something in return, it may be a little bit easier. But from an organizational perspective, and depending on the values or sort of the goals of the organization, that becomes difficult. And that process becomes just a little bit more complex than sort of our everyday will to help people. And so That's in talking through this with Rich. He really pulled out the term complex reciprocity because of the complex nature when we bring a multitude of different types of organizations together, and that it was just the best way to really describe the work that we were doing. And as I thought through that process based upon some of the organizations that I've worked with and some of the networks that I've been a part of, yes, we all have common goals and sort of mutual purpose, but the process of achieving those without, in the context of organizations and without really taking away sort of organizational needs from it, it's a difficult process. And so Rich just thought it was really the best way to sort of describe sort of what we were doing.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Marcus, I really, I don't know if you could have done this on purpose, but the timing of you sending or this getting put in front of us by Law Center was really fortuitous because 2023 felt like a sprint the whole time, and having a chance to think about the purpose of the work and how to structure it and how to analyze it was not available. So we get to the middle of winter and suddenly like I have a few brain cells available to read something like this and to conceptualize it. I don't have a question even exactly. I just appreciate the framework of the going from coordinating networks to cooperating to collaborating. So I'm the facilitator of the Illinois Food System Infrastructure Collaborative. It's a role I've been in for like 8 months now or so. The idea being trying to create a community of practice like the Food System Leadership Network does for our state, for people who are trying to develop food system infrastructure projects in the state of Illinois. And when I read your breakdown of those 3 types of networks, we call it a collaborative. Well, we're still very much a cooperating network, but for me, that creates an aspiration. Because what I want to be is that sort of 3rd tier, high risk, high impact network. So I don't really have a comment. I just wanted to say that I appreciate it.
Sure.
I appreciate that context a lot, and that gives me a goal to shoot for and something I can use to explain to the rest of the network of where I'm trying to go with all this. So thank you.
Sure. And I will say, and I didn't respond to the second piece of what Andrew asked was, how do you begin to foster these things? And I'll say just engagement. And so in leadership development, effective leadership, a key tenet of effective leadership relates to engagement. And there are different levels of engagement. And I even look at this when we're building, teams of people for grants, for grant proposals, and really understanding who I want to work with, or what grants do I pursue. Am I pursuing grants just to chase the money, or am I pursuing a grant to relate to create some direct impact to the communities that I serve? And so, how I build those teams of people, it's just related to engagement and just the traditional notion of networking, bringing together a group of like-minded people while our professional expertise may be in different areas. Our long-term interests and our sort of long-term goals are the same. And if you can bring together groups of people, like-minded people in that way, that truly care about the work, truly care about the communities that we serve, I think that's sort of the most direct way to foster this notion of complex reciprocity. It's difficult within larger organizational settings, but if you're certainly in a position where you can, choose teams or choose the people around you to facilitate work, it helps. The other piece of it really relates to if you're fostering a network, you're bringing a collaborative of people or groups together to achieve some goal. Just having at the forefront of bringing those people together of what the end goal and the end result is that you're working toward to achieve is at the forefront. While we all come together in collaboratives, there's sort of individual interests that sort of come into those situations if it's to the best of our ability to keep whatever the sort of the common goal and the mutual purpose that we've come together for, make that the main thing, and to the extent possible. That's sort of the other way that we look at sort of developing that. Ahmad?
Thank you. You talked about some involvement in the Central Valley in terms of monitoring processes and production. I'm in the Central Valley as well, and in general, happy to learn about different projects like that towards your point of, collaborating and connecting. So I would love to hear more about that and see if there's alignment. And then to add, one area that we focus on in our organization is fiber. And a lot of our conversations center on food, and understandably so. But in terms of adding fiber to that conversation, any information or tips on how that might be different or how to frame it as well. So those couple things. And thank you for that wonderful information.
Sure. So the project that I discussed, that I mentioned briefly early on related to the Central Valley, is the Next California project. It's a project that's sort of being facilitated by the World Wildlife Fund, where they brought together an advisory group of people, that are primarily based in the Mississippi Delta region, to begin to think through what it looks like to begin to look at some of the crops that are currently being produced in California, where we were experiencing issues of drought and other things related to climate change. And what does it look like to begin some of that production in the mid Delta region? Looking at infrastructure, looking at processing facilities and other capabilities that are directly related to agricultural production. And so there's a cooperating group network of people. That's what we've been for the past 3 years, where we've come together and shared information and best practices about how we can take existing infrastructure in the Mississippi Delta region and to begin to shift and try and start the process of growing more food, in more diverse types of food in the region. The meeting that I just got on right before this related directly to how do we become more of a collaborating network to really drive some systems change, and what other individuals do we need at the table to effectively do that, is the next sort of part of our conversation. It's that process has been sort of difficult for us. From the example, for example, I mean, we have state departments of agriculture representatives that have been a part of those conversations. We have the 1862 land grant institutions that are in the region that have been a part of the process. We have community-based organizations. We have local food policy councils just as a part of that, all of which have individual interests that come to the table. And so the centering piece for us that we boil down to is just, we really just want to provide opportunities for producers that want to grow a diverse variety of food, that, the Mississippi Delta region is a way to do that. Whether that's, new and beginning farmers that are looking to get into agriculture, or whether that's existing producers in the Central Valley of California that are looking for new ways to produce food in a different area, that the central, the mid Delta region provides that opportunity. Whether this is something that's going to foster some direct systemic change, decade from now, several decades from now, we don't know. But we at least want to be able to put a framework together to show what those opportunities are and how those opportunities can exist in the Mississippi Delta region. And that's what that was related to.
Excellent. If there's any way to send out information, or if there's somewhere I can connect with that, I'd be happy to follow up.
Sure. I'll give you and I'll get your drop your email address in the chat, and I will forward you the initial report that we had on that.
You can find it in the sea of information if I just do that.
Oh, that's right. Everybody drop the information in the chat, right? I got you.
If that's workable for you, I'm happy.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm good. I can find it. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Kip?
Thank you again, Dr. Coleman, for this wonderful information and for all the work you've done on these topics. I was really interested in and really resonated with your use of risk as sort of framing these different levels of how different networks work, the high functioning networks, and how they each kind of operate at a different level of risk for you. And it's interesting because it's something that I think about a lot, but don't bring up that word in particular when I'm talking about network development spaces. So I'm really interested to hear just a little bit more about how you think about that risk. Like, what kinds of risks are folks taking on at these different levels of high functioning network development? And have you seen, and do you have advice for people to bring that conversation about risk sharing as part of their development of shared governance for a network?
Sure. And the most immediate example that I can use is levels of financial risk and investments of resources and other funds in order to make networks effective. Typically, what happens when a group of people get together, at least in the organizations that I've been involved with, is people go out and try to identify grant funding to facilitate sort of the operations or facilitate the work. But I think that a real level of investment comes when organizations that are committed to a certain cause come together to do work. Is how much of those organizations' budget lines attached to that initiative? How much is an organization willing to invest, whether that's in staff time, whether that's dedicating, from the perspective of dedicating staff to work specifically on that initiative, that collaborative initiative, or are we really just simply relying on soft funds, external funds to facilitate that work? From a true, collaborating perspective, I've seen those succeed more when organizations around the table are willing to invest employee time as well as other resources to achieve that common goal or that mutual interest. But again, that from a financial perspective, that just depends on the availability of funds and how well funded, the individuals or the organizations that are part of that collaborative network, their ability to do that. But that sort of financial, I look at it the same way that I look at diversity and equity inclusion work at university campuses. From a cooperating piece, we can put up a diversity statement on our website, but really and truly to be really truly collaborative in fostering, and creating change. How much budget lines are we putting into new faculty lines across the departments to hire in diverse faculty that work on diverse issues? And so I kind of look at that sort of scale from that perspective of levels of investment of time, resources, and money into achieving goals.
Thank you. Susan?
My favorite
Yeah.
New Orleans person.
Hey, good to see you, Marcus, and everybody. Thank you so much. This has been like really inspiring and just like stimulating for me mentally. I really needed it. So similar to what Jeff was sharing, just like needing this conceptual framework to kind of kick off the year. So thank you. And as Kit was just raising that question, I was also thinking about power and how the power sharing that's required within collaborative networks is also risky, right? To like let go of your own, I don't know, to some degree vision, but that's an independent level, and release your control to the collective is also a pretty risky maneuver. So something that I was just thinking about. But Marcus, I was wondering, I love the notion of collaboration infrastructure, and you name it in the paper. And as I was reflecting on some of the networks that were named, and I thought about what's been possible as a result of the collaboration infrastructure in those places like Iowa and Michigan, you think about some of these like really complex new programs that have been rolled out in the last couple of years, like the local food purchase assistance program and the regional food business centers that are like multi-million-dollar initiatives through USDA. In these states where there has been really robust collaboration infrastructure built up, those programs and that money is getting like accelerated so quickly and mobilized so quickly. But then in other places, I hate to throw my own state under the bus, Louisiana, we don't have that. And so, we've really seen the challenges of trying to mobilize this funding here by not having that collaboration infrastructure. So I wonder if you could just like maybe speak a little more to like, what is that? And what are the skills that are needed? Because you name as, you know, one of the priorities is like we need funding for that, right? To build the collaborative infrastructure. But we also need the skills and the competencies to be able to do that. So can you just talk a little bit about what collaboration infrastructure is and what the skills are that we need to develop as food systems leaders to help cultivate and curate that kind of infrastructure?
So I basically at a core, I look at collaboration infrastructure is providing sort of a platform or a foundation where to bring people together. You know, it takes time to schedule a meeting. It takes time to set up Zoom platforms. It takes time to create sort of a web hub of information where people can come in and get resources and share resources. Those things take time. And so when you have a collaborative effort with 10 different people, 10 different organizations, those folks have their own work, their day-to-day work, and may not have time to focus on that core of bringing everybody together. And so when we look at collaboration infrastructure, and we talk about, you know, types of networking and investing resources to do these things, putting an individual or group of individuals in place just to facilitate the work that's involved in that particular initiative. The types of skills that go into that: network building, network weaving, bringing people together, not being able to sort of really understand sort of the role and responsibilities and the work that everybody that's coming together to table that they play in that, and being able to take that information and being able to synthesize all of that to create to assist in creating a plan to achieve the common goal of the mutual purpose of the collaborative group. It's just that foundation. It's a stable foundation. When people within the collaborative environment go back to their day-to-day jobs, who's left to continue to push forward the work that the collaboration or the collaborating entity is seeking to work on. Those are the types of things that really focus on long-term versus sort of short-term successes. You know, we talk about a state like Louisiana. I mean, other states have um, and I only say this because I live in Louisiana, so I'm going to pick on Louisiana for a little bit. Um, you know, other states have the luxury of having, you know, a lot of longstanding, sustainable, community-based organizations that sort of developed a statewide reputation and having a trusted reputation to foster collaboration, in addition to entities like the land grant institutions in the state. For a state like Louisiana, you know, our most longstanding structure is really the land grant system here in the state, that may or may not have the best relationships with communities. And so it's sort of this, we talk about leadership power and leadership sharing. That's something that really doesn't exist. It hasn't existed in the state of Louisiana. We're at a time now where we have several smaller organizations that are doing great work on the ground. But you know, in that infrastructure or that ability to provide that foundation or being able to invest in building that foundation it's taking time to get the funding and the resources necessary to dedicate for that sort of collaboration infrastructure. And whereas in other states you may have like the Center for Regional Food Systems at Michigan State that provides a collaboration infrastructure for a lot of initiatives. We really, to my knowledge, we really don't have that here in Louisiana. And so the organizations that are doing this work are doing it to the best of their ability in the absence of sort of that centering, collaborating infrastructure. And so it's challenging, and it's probably, you know, a similar issue that, you know, many folks are dealing with around the country. But you know, how can we best work to sort of achieve that? You know, the key piece is when we're writing, at least from my perspective, when we're writing grant proposals, we make sure that a key piece of the grant proposal that we're writing is to sort of build collaboration infrastructure as a part of that, in addition to, you know, requesting funds for salaries and requesting activities and programmatic funds within that. We have to also, as a part of that, being able to invest in building a collaboration infrastructure. Alyssa, you're muted. Still muted.
We can't hear you, Alyssa. Yeah. She'll figure it out. We'll get her on. You can feel free to type in the chat too if you need to. But we want to hear from our friends over in New Mexico. While we're waiting for Alyssa to get her microphone going, is there any other questions or comments that folks are sitting with? Like, are you having the opportunity to reflect on how your organization, based off of the report that Marcus has just gave us an overview of, have you had a time to reflect on, some of the work that you're doing and how this might impact you, maybe for like next steps?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
It's because I am a hybrid worker, so I go back and forth between the office. So like when I switch from one to the other, everything breaks. So thank you for being patient with me. I just wanted to say I'm Alyssa Pearson with the NMDA. We're really lucky here that we were able to build LFPA on the foundation of the work that's been done by the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association. But I do want to say, those kinds of programs do have a double-sidedness to them. When the farm to school procurement started in New Mexico, it was state procurement practices. And so there really wasn't a lot of room to build in values-based procurement, equitability, socially disadvantaged producers. So while we really, cannot understate the amount that we benefit from that existing system, it's one of the things we've had to overcome in our program is overcoming maybe preconceived notions that these programs are not for them, doing outreach to the communities that are targeted by these programs. So that kind of intentionality from the get-go is really meaningful, because trying to shift while the ship is already midstream is a whole other kind of thing. So to the defense of Louisiana and the work that you guys are getting to build from the ground up, for sure.
I have a great appreciation for the organizations in Louisiana that are doing food systems work. I'm from Louisiana. I'm not from New Orleans, and for me, in my perspective, those are two different things. And I've told Susan this before. There's a lot of great things that are happening in New Orleans related to the food system. But we need a lot of work to make sure that the rest of Louisiana, and particularly the rural areas, are also getting that level of support. And so there's a group of organizations here in New Orleans, in Louisiana, that have really come together to try and to do information sharing and do work and collaborative work across the state. And being able to, to have that collaborative group of folks and provide them some support, I think is important, because they're serving a role here in this state that existing infrastructure hasn't necessarily served. And so I'm very excited about what they're doing, and I hope they continue to do that work too.
And you're also kind of getting into the other point here, that a lot of times these food system organizations are urban and they have a lot of urban people. So when you're actually trying to get down into the communities, New Mexico Farmers Marketing is in Santa Fe. So the Santa Fe Albuquerque Metro is where a huge portion of the population is, but not where the vast majority of our ag producers are. So, and the representation in the rural communities is different than what you're going to find in the urban areas. So it's just really trying to make sure that you do that kind of outreach, and they're harder to get a hold of. They just, those rural communities, it's harder to break in and develop those relationships, for sure.
And a very powerful tool that could be used is working, I pick on extension all the time, but building relationships with cooperative extension, in a state like Louisiana, having a presence in each of the 64 parishes, or with the 1862 land grant here, or even working with 1890 land grant here in the state, and the parishes that they serve, and building those relationships with the people on the ground in those parishes, those extension agents versus sort of the extension agents versus the central hub. I think that's important as well, because those folks have those relationships. They know sort of the landscape. They know where the resources are needed most. But in many cases, building relationships and fostering collaborations with some of the folks on the ground in the parishes or the counties is difficult because of sort of central politics as well. It's something to overcome.
Well, thank you, Dr. Coleman, and everyone who had questions and comments to add to this like very valuable conversation. We have a few minutes left. We have about 15 minutes left of time, and I just wanted to see if there were any last minute questions and comments. And if not, I would invite you all to unmute yourself and give Dr. Coleman a cheerful noise of appreciation for his time here together. So everybody unmute and we give him a round of applause.
Yeah, Marcus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thanks so much.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank y'all so
Yeah.
much.
Before we go, I'm going to stop the recording because we have a few things that we want to offer to the network. We have a few things coming up, and we also, hold on.